Greetings, friends. Trump failed to end the Ukraine war, and he owns it now. He owns it to the extent where if Ukraine collapses to the extent that South Vietnam collapses, which it won't because not the whole country is going to be conquered by Russia, but if half of it collapses, if everything up to the Dnieper collapses and maybe Kiev and maybe Odessa, Trump's going to own that. It's going to have the same effect as Gerald Ford watching Saigon be evacuated to the last helicopter, or perhaps a sleepy Joe Biden not watching because not being aware, but being president while Kabul and Afghanistan finally collapsed to the victorious Taliban. That'll be Trump's to own. He could have ditched the war from day one. Even though he did escalate it during his first term, he could have politically played it off on Biden and said to the American public that this is not my war, this is Biden's war and the Democrats. And as he said repeatedly, this would never have started under me if I had been president at the time. Okay, then that would have been the most face-saving he could do. But for some reason, he thought he could make a deal with Russia that would be successful. I guess he was misinformed. He thought that he had leverage over Russia. I don't know why he thought this, because how many sanctions packages had been tried? A dozen practically over the several years since the special military operation began. Not to mention all the actual fighting on the battlefield, all the weapons they'd send, the different kinds of tanks, the HIMARS missiles, the Starlink, and all these other forms of support, financial and technological and otherwise, from the global American empire and from European countries as well. That hadn't been able to change the tide. I don't know, it's weird because you'd think people at high levels of power are more informed about things. Maybe sometimes they're not. Maybe sometimes a CEO is very informed about certain things and knows how to do certain things very well, and then other things it's completely, not that we can be informed about everything obviously, but the logic, the humility to say, well, I don't know what's really going on here. This is a really important thing. Maybe I should make sure I understand this matter before I make decisions. You'd think that logic would apply, but I guess it goes out the window sometimes. No one understands Trump. No one's ever going to understand him. Maybe he doesn't understand himself. People say he goes by whatever the last person that talked to him said. So whoever is the last person that spoke to him, as Zelensky spoke to him for 15 minutes in the Vatican during Pope Francis's funeral, which wasn't very polite, and apparently swayed Trump's mind. Who knows if that's a true story, but swayed his mind in saying, look, I'll agree to your ceasefire deal, but we need assurances. I'll sign this mineral deal with you, and I need assurances from you. And Trump has now agreed to this mineral deal, which is more of a natural gas, other resources, not so much minerals because those are in eastern Ukraine, which Russia is taking. It's not really a deal specifically. It's more of a commitment, at least on a 10-year time scale, to give the U.S. a reason to be involved in Ukraine, where they can now justify selling weapons or loaning money to the Ukrainians, where they've even conceded to be paid back. They don't need to be paid back. We'll have this interest, this business relationship with Ukraine. So it's a way of passing it off to Congress, where Congress can now start voting again to send weapons and money to Ukraine formally, expressly, because now it'll be more like, well, they'll be approving deals, like you'll be paid back, right? You'll be paid back maybe sometime by this country, which may or may not even exist. We're moving in the direction of how things were with Joe Biden, but he hasn't escalated it. But how much can you escalate it? Like, much of the military hardware has already been spent, but you can keep a certain intensity of warfare going indefinitely. And Trump is going to allow, if even a low simmer, maybe he's even going to turn up the burner to number 5 setting. Maybe not number 7 setting. Ukraine, they can't do a big counteroffensive like they did June of 2023. That ability is lost, and they're slowly going to eventually collapse. But, I mean, it's a big country. Still a lot of money coming into it. Still a lot of guys haven't gone to the front. Still a lot of things you can do. This war can continue for a few more years, as scary as that is. But I don't really know. Things could change quickly. Things could change more slowly. I mean, it's an attritional war, but at some point it stands to reason there will be a collapse. how long it takes depends on the political will, and the political will is not there to end this thing on either side. Not on the Ukrainian side, they're extremely stubborn. The Russians want real concessions. They want what they reiterated, where Putin stated in June of 2024. The 4 regions are recognized. Ukraine shall never be in NATO, and that Ukraine is denazified. That there won't be any anti-Russian elements. Basically, that the country is neutralized, which is a tough bargain. But if they're winning the war, what are you going to do? And NATO and Ukraine have not been winning the war. They've been losing. They can't accept that, so they keep fighting. And Zelensky and his regime are stubborn enough that they'll fight to the end. Some of them will fight to the death, but Zelensky will probably just get out of the country. So I don't know why Trump thought that the Ukrainians would agree to any substantial concessions, and why would the Russians agree to a ceasefire when they are winning and when they can't have any assurance of real concessions on the part of their adversary. All the history of diplomacy going back 20 years has been one disappointment after another. Maybe both sides see it that way, but there's no trust here. So what else could happen but the war is fought to its military conclusion? The remaining cities of the Donbass are now under siege. Some of them are falling. Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, some of these other cities still holding out. But once they fall, the last bulwark of the Donbass goes down, and the pathway to the Dnieper River stands before the Russian army, which is now very large. And it ended up being true. They are working with the North Koreans. I stand corrected. I thought that was fake news. I was wrong. They are allied with North Korea. Point being, they have an increasingly large army, which they are now mobilizing against Ukraine. What did Trump think he was going to accomplish by sticking this thing out? And it's ridiculous for the US to claim to mediate between Ukraine and Russia, because this is the US fighting Russia by using Ukraine. It's the United States' war. It's their war against Russia. They're using Ukraine. They're allowing Ukrainian men to be the ones who shoot the rifles and stand in the trenches and die. For the most part, Americans haven't done that. There have been some special forces probably that have gone over there, and of course mercenaries or volunteers or whatever you want to call them from various countries. And of course on the Russian side too. Trump thought that he could use some leverage which didn't exist and use his art of deal making to hurry Putin along, to rush him along into making a deal quickly, a deal which accommodated the US. He had the same thinking about China, and it failed. It failed with regards to Russia and China. They didn't come to a deal right away. China, in terms of the trade war, is standing its ground. Putin stood his ground. He didn't agree to any ceasefire, and now the negotiation process for a long-term peace is indefinitely on hold. Ukraine doesn't want a serious peace. Russia doesn't see any reason to think that they would be granted a good agreement, so they're going to persevere in fighting. The Europeans, for the most part, at least Britain, France, some of the major countries that have backed Ukraine, they don't really want Ukraine to concede, and they have the sentiment to even continue helping Ukraine fight, even though they're not really able to contribute much physically. And many in the United States, in the Trump administration, being neocons, don't really want these concessions to be made to Russia either. It was just sometimes Trump, when he's thinking a certain way, in the right frame of thinking, and then other people like J.D. Vance and other people around him that influenced him that we could call realists, that wanted to really ditch Ukraine in the sense of actually ditching Ukraine, actually giving Putin a reason to stop it all, which is cutting the flow of weapons and money, actually walking away. Then the fighting's going to stop pretty fast anyways, because Ukraine's going to run out of materiel and manpower and ammunition and fuel and technology and replacement parts. They're going to run out of all that in weeks. Air defense systems, all of these things they need continuously replenished. They're going to run out fast. But no, Trump could never do that. And really, at the end of the day, Is it Trump's doing, or is he just going along? Is it just continuity of agenda, as Brian Berletic calls it? I mean, could you say that Trump instituted the COVID policies? No, he just went along with a bigger globalist plan. He gave it his own spin, Operation Warp Speed. So Trump does a similar thing. He goes along with these larger forces which he really can't control or doesn't want to really actually challenge, or just can't, or thinks, or tries to and fails. But either way, the same continuity of agenda is seen with regards to the Middle East, escalation towards China now. The global American empire is overextended. They don't have the necessary battle groups, even in the Navy, that they had 20, 30 years ago. They don't have the training that they would have had in previous decades. Just last week, there was an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea, which is in that theater of operations to deal with the Houthis in Yemen, who have been targeting Israeli and American shipping. I don't think they've been targeting other nations' shipping that I've heard. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But of course, the Americans say, oh, they're there protecting world shipping. But it's like, well, you're being targeted and the Israelis are being targeted because of what's happening in Palestine. That's why you're being targeted by the Houthis. So anyways, they're too close to the land because the Red Sea is not that wide. And you've got these big ships in there. They really shouldn't be there too close to the land. And the Houthis, they have these missiles buried underground. They come out, they fire these missiles at the shipping, at the American Navy. And that's what happened last week. There was an aircraft carrier going through the Red Sea. They have to keep moving, of course. They can't stay in one place because it's dangerous to do that as it stands. When a missile comes in unexpectedly and the captain had to maneuver the ship, take a drastic turn, in other words. And as they were making this drastic turn, they had been moving an F-18 a level down or so in the hangar. So the crew was moving this plane out, either to take off or moving it back. I'm not sure. And I guess there was some tractor or vehicle also employed in moving this aircraft. And both the aircraft and the tractor rolled as the ship turned and they went into the sea. And luckily, the pilot and the guy operating the vehicle ditched at the last minute, and I believe they survived. But the F-18 was lost, however many millions of dollars that costs. And the tractor went into the sea too. That's not as valuable. So that's a huge waste of money. These sorts of little tears in the fabric of the global American empire, draining its resources, making it more difficult to concentrate for any sort of concerted effort to win a war such as would be necessary in a place like Ukraine. The missiles that they have to spend to target the Houthi missiles, which are harassing them, costs millions of dollars too. So there's millions and millions of dollars being drained by the day or by the week in this theater just because of military hardware being used to target other military hardware, whether or not someone actually gets killed. Trump is involved in all of this now. He's the peace president. It's a new golden age, as he said. Hasta luego, amigos.